Amen. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. And it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So is it possible for your life in our world today to really make a difference? The fact that you are a Christian, and as you live your life around people from day to day, just in your own sphere, that it really has an impact upon the condition of our world, even the moral and spiritual condition of our world today. It's good to see all of you here today. I know some of you have been sick, and it's really nice to look around and see that you're back. John, you and last Sunday we spoke about the Beatitudes there in Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, and blessed are they that mourn." And he talked about the character of a Christian and those qualities in your life that bring you to God in the first place and help your faith to grow to the progress of the point where you obey Christ and become a Christian. And those qualities then, that as you grow in your faith, you become more and more like God, and you become merciful and pure in heart, and you're a peacemaker, and your faith is tested, and you're even willing to suffer for Christ. But in these verses that we're looking at here, starting in verse 13, we see that Jesus is talking really about the impact that you are able to have, the influence of a Christian for good in the world that we live in. And when we think about that, it really gives us pause to wonder how that is possible. Because how is it that people who have those characteristics that he described, being poor in spirit and mourners and meek and hungry for righteousness, merciful and pure in heart and peacemakers, how can people like that have much influence at all in the world that we live in today, where there is such an aggressive agenda that the world seems to be on a self-destructive course almost, and it seems to be that if the world is just left to itself, the world just keeps getting worse and worse all the time. And yet, Jesus did not share that type of pessimism about the effect that his people in this world are able to have. Jesus declares here very clearly that you are the salt of the earth. Not just the salt as he was speaking to the people of his own people, the Jews, but he is saying they would be the salt of the earth, and they would be the light of the world. And those are grand statements that Jesus is making there, and he doesn't have any doubt that that is a fact, that we are able, you and I, and those who, if we are true to our character as his disciples, that we are able to have a huge impact upon the world around us. And Jesus, as he made his points here and described how this is true, used two items that are found in every home: salt and light. two very simple domestic products that I'm sure Jesus himself, as he was growing up, many times would see his own mother in the kitchen, and she would be using salt, and they would have a candle or a lamp in the house for light. And he used those two simple commodities to illustrate how you and I, as his followers, even still today, we're able to have an impact and an influence for good upon the world around us. So Jesus was not at all doubtful about the ability or the potential ability that his followers have upon the world for good. As we think about those two items, salt and light, obviously we can understand why there is a need for light. I mean, that is obvious. That whether we're talking about a lamp in the house or turning the light switch on when we come home at night, we all understand why we need light. That much is pretty obvious. But when we think about salt, salt has a lot of different uses. And yet, as far back as you go in time, you find that salt has always been used as an essential basic item of human diet for seasoning. And that even in the Old Testament, there's references of using salt when they would eat. That what good is it to eat an egg if there isn't salt with it? And things like that. I mean, that has always been the way that it has been used as a condiment, as part of the seasoning for our food. But it's also had a variety of other uses, and one of them being as a preservative. And as in the meat, to prevent and hinder the meat from decaying and keep it in a wholesome use, salt can be rubbed into the meat. And we have things like beef jerky and other types of meat that if it is prepared properly, it can be preserved. And so salt had that use back in those times, that they did not have refrigeration like we have today even, but by the use of salt, it would be able to preserve the meat from going bad. So Jesus is comparing that with the world, the world that we live in, and pointing out that there is an analogy to be drawn there. There is a similarity to that. That when we look at the world is decaying like meat. That it is going bad to worse. And it's going to continue to progress in that direction. But there's something that we are able to do about that, and that we as disciples of Christ and followers of Christ are able to hinder that. We are able to prevent that decay from happening in the lives of people around about us. And that is valuable. But he's also mentioning the fact that the world that we live in is a dark place. And that the one thing that the world needs is light. And where is that light going to come from? Because we are the ones who are able to shine that light on the world around us. And with those two powerful things, being able to mix in the preservative influence and being able to introduce and illumine with the light that we're able to bring from God and from Christ, we're able to have an influence and an impact for good upon the world around us. Something that the world desperately needs. So even though we might tend to look at ourselves as a small minority of people, and Chuck mentioned the fact that we're not exactly living in the Bible Belt here in the Northwest, that if there is a minority to be spoken, we really are in that location. And yet Jesus is saying that it still applies, that we are able to have an impact and make a difference in your life and in my life, in us as a body of people, of Christ's people, living in this area here on what we sometimes say the left coast. We're still able to have an impact for good. Something that the world really is desperately needing. He's pointing out the fact here that the church and the world are definitely distinct. I mean, let's not make any bones about the fact that the church and the world is two different communities of people entirely. And we shouldn't get into the thinking of these somehow can be blending together and we can fit in and not be distinct. But at the same time, Jesus was talking about in the prayer that he prayed in John chapter 17, his, what we would correctly maybe say, the Lord's Prayer in John chapter 17, where he is praying to his Father and he's praying for his disciples, primarily there. And he said, "They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. I do not pray," he said, "that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one." In other words, Jesus is saying there that we are in the world, but we are not of the world. But the church and the world are distinct. And he is saying here that the world, see, is decaying. The world is dying. The world is rotting and putrefying, but we are the salt of the earth. We are what preserves it and keeps it from going that way. We at least slow it down. We can retard it. And we can make a difference in the lives of those people. And on the other hand, he's saying the world is a dark place out there, but we can shine the light on the world. So while the church and the world are distinct, they have a relationship, and there is a relationship because we are in the world, but we are not of the world. And that is the key to how we can have this impact. The fact that we are not like the world, but we are different from the world, even though we are in the world. And we do need to come in contact with the world. We do not need to withdraw from the world. Some, convents and other societies have had the mistaken idea they could be more effective if they just withdrew from the world and lived in a cave somewhere. And that isn't what Jesus is calling us to do. Jesus wants us to live in the world, but to be distinct, to be of a different makeup from within, in the character that we have, and that is what's going to bring impact upon the world. The fact that we are the salt of the earth and we are the light of the world. We are the ones who can be able to make a difference as a result of that. So he says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? So Jesus is making, there is a condition that is attached to this. There's an affirming of the fact that you are the salt of the earth, but there's a retainer that in order for that to be, if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It has to have that distinctive quality. Now, some would say that salt, it really cannot lose its saltiness. Because what is salt? Well, it's sodium chloride. And that is a very stable element. But salt can lose, it can get bleached out, it can get washed out, and it becomes almost just like a powder that does not have the pungent quality that it would have to be necessary to do what Jesus is talking about, to be able to preserve. And they had salt in the land of Israel that came out from the Dead Sea, because the Dead Sea is the lowest place on earth. The Jordan River goes down and it flows into the Dead Sea south of Jericho, and it is 1,292 feet below sea level. They even say that people can go floating in the Sea of Galilee and you cannot sink. Which is hard to believe, because I could think I could sink in anything. Because I never did learn to swim, because we didn't have any water in West Texas where I grew up. But nevertheless, it's very salty, saline content. And yet, they would have salt deposits that were worthless that came out of the Dead Sea, just the residue. And you could walk along the edges of the Dead Sea and you could see this white powdery substance that was just piled up along the edges. And that is what Jesus was referring to, that if salt has lost its saltiness, it is good for nothing to be thrown out and trodden underfoot of men. And they would powder it up and grind it up and just put it on the road surface. So if we are going to have this impact upon the world, we must be salt. We must have that element. We must have that quality about it. Otherwise, what good is it? It's good for nothing. In order for a Christian to really have a value in the world, we must have this essential quality that we are the character of Christ. We are unlike the world. We are distinctive. And we are salty in a world that is decaying. And when we think about that, the world is decaying like rotten meat. The church can hinder its decay. The effectiveness of salt is conditional upon retaining that quality. Jesus said in Mark chapter 9 and verse 50, "Salt is good, but if the salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another." And when Paul is writing to the Colossians, he said, "Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one." We need to have a certain element of our life that we aren't afraid to stand up and let our life shine and let our life be seen around other people, that we are different than they are. And it might come out in our language. Have you ever been around people that did not at first know that you were a Christian, and they were using all sorts of four-letter words, and then somehow they became aware of the fact that, oh, I didn't realize that you were a Christian, and all of a sudden their language started getting a lot cleaner. And some of the stories they were telling. Because whenever a person like that is around someone that is a true believer and a godly person, it bothers their conscience in a little bit to speak that way And so they try to clean up their act, so to speak. Well, that's good. Be the salt. Don't be afraid to be the salt. Be different. And it will also have an effect on their conduct, their immoral behavior. Your life can make a difference that way and have an influence on them, how they are living their life, because you are living a godly life. Jesus then goes on to say, he said, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Light drives out the darkness. And the world is dark and prefers darkness because their works are evil. But the existence of Christians in the world brings light. Jesus in John chapter 3, he said, "And this is the condemnation," verse 19, "that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen that they have been done in God." Well, we also see that you and I, as Christians, we are able to function as light in our lives by walking in the light of God and truth of His will for our lives, so that our lives conform to the will of God, not to the will of the world. We're told in 1 John chapter 1 and verse 5, "This is the message which we have heard from him and declare to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin." In reality, Jesus is the light of the world. He said that in John chapter 8 and verse 12. But as we come to know him, that light begins to be passed on through us, and we are walking in the light, therefore we function as light. Even though the light is not from us, but it is from Christ and from God, still it is able to flow through us, and we become lights in our own way. But Jesus is saying here, do not put this light under a basket, because then the light will not shine. We have to allow that light to shine and not be ashamed to let the world see that we are Christians. We, as Paul said in Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes." We must not be ashamed of the gospel. We must not be ashamed of the word of Christ in our life. We should not try to hide the fact that we are a Christian when we are around unbelievers and non-Christians. Let them know it's okay for us to live in a way that we can do it respectfully and not offensively, and we do not have to be people who are bullying others or are being rude in the way that we present ourselves, but allow our light to shine. And one of the ways that we allow our light to shine, he said, is through your good works. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Some have interpreted that in the way to mean that it is strictly speaking about evangelizing, that your works, your good works, is spreading the gospel. And while that is true, that includes spreading the gospel, the good works that Jesus is describing, I believe, is speaking about good works that we do out of love for our fellow man. That as we live around people who are unsaved, living in the world, we demonstrate through our love to them the love of God. And it may be in the way of visiting those who are sick, or taking them a meal, or sharing something with a person in need, or just a kind word, or taking an interest in their life. But there's different ways that through our good works that we show that person that they are valuable in the eyes of God, even though they may not be living that kind of life. They may see your good works, and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That is how we can change the world. How did Jesus do it? That's exactly how Jesus did it. One person at a time. Jesus was willing to take his time for one person at a time and care about that individual. Whether it was a little child, or whether it was someone who was blind, or someone who was needy in various ways, Jesus cared about the person. And that is how you and I can let our good works be seen and have an influence for good in this world that is dark. Now, when we think about our responsibility as salt and light, what Jesus is saying, we have to be willing to accept that responsibility. And that responsibility is both positive and negative. Because the influence of salt is mostly of a negative impact, in that it is to preserve rotting decay. Whereas the influence of light is largely positive, because it is to illuminate the darkness. We are to be accepting the responsibility on both sides. That we have a responsibility to try to introduce salt that retards or holds back the decay. Let your light shine to bring the light of God in. So there's a negative responsibility, and there is a positive responsibility involved in being salt and light. But what I want to say is the world needs that influence. And sometimes we may not feel like we are contributing very much to that. Just little old you and little old me. I mean, are we really making a difference? We sometimes would question. Jesus is saying, yes, you are making a difference. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Now, we may not be functioning entirely as we should. That is a possibility. That is a responsibility that we have to be willing to accept. I have to be willing to accept not being ashamed of Christ. I have to be willing to stand up and be counted and let my light be seen. And I have to be willing to get involved in helping people who need help and caring about the individual that I come in contact with. That's my responsibility. Well, what Jesus is saying is it can make a difference. If you are true to the character of what a Christian is supposed to be true, if the church is true to the character that the church is supposed to be, and the world is true to the responsibility of what the world is to be, then the impact of the church upon the world is a huge impact for good. It's going to make a difference. And it's up to us. God is counting on us to be this. He's counting on us to be the salt and the light of the world. Let's not disappoint Him. He has confidence in us that we are able to provide that needed impact upon the society that we are living in today. Let's not let Him down. Let's be that salt. Let's be that light so that we can have that impact and make a difference in the lives of the people around us. We're going to stand and sing the invitation song that has been announced this morning. And there may be one here today. You may be here and you may be needing to respond to the gospel this morning. Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Are you willing to make that commitment? Turn away from sin, repent of sin, confess your faith in Jesus. And are you willing to be buried, baptized into Christ this morning, that you may be raised to walk in newness of life? We're going to stand and sing the invitation. If you're here and subject in any way, we invite you to come as we stand together and sing.